Hey guys, welcome to another mix tutorial. Lower energy day today. I don't want to film, so I'll get to catching up on these mix tutorials. So let's go over my cover of 4D from NORTHLANE's new album, Alien. I've been getting a lot of people saying this song brings them back to their childhood because of the Linkin Park vibe and the chord progression, and I gotta say, absolutely, this song does that for me too, and it's super incredible. Let's start where we usually start, on my master bus. So all of the mix is going through our usual bus compressor. Let's see how much it's compressing today. Just a little bit on every kick and snare hit to get them together with the mix. And today's transformer option is steel, so there's a little bump at 50 Hz. Those sub frequencies are a little bit boosted with this option. That's what this is doing. Our multi-band compressor, his purpose is to flatten the frequency response of our mix in case there's some imbalance. So let's see what's happening today. So just the usual, the mid-range band is being well hit by the guitars, the low mid band is being hit by the snare, and our sub band is getting hit by the kick and bass. This helps me get a nice balanced mix without going into individual tracks, but get that as glue on my master bus. And here is my usual limiter, Ozone. There is a high pass, before the limiter at 28 Hz to get rid of sub frequencies before it hits the limiter. There's the tiniest bit of stereo widening, very, very tiny. Don't abuse this on your master bus. And the limiter, let's see how much it's working today. Mostly just reacting to kick and snare hits, and we're reducing up to 6 decibels on each kick and snare hit. Let's go over this drum sound. This is a drum sound I've used before, but there's some key changes, so I'll be explaining the drum sound again. The components of this drum sound are Invasion for the kick drum and cymbals, and Modern and Massive for snare and toms. The difference between last time where I used this combination is I have a different snare, and that's gonna send the whole thing out of balance into a different tone. I also have Superior Drummer just to get my favorite bell and my favorite china. So, the difference between last tone, for all of you guys that have been here for a longer time and have watched me use this combination of drums, is that I've switched the Modern and Massive snare. I'm usually using I'll see by the picture, the Paduk snare. This is the snare I would usually use. But on this album, it started to sound way too big and fat, especially in a fast song like 4D. So I switched to the high-tuned bell brass, which has much more of a tighter, snappier sound. And then I reduced how much it sends to the rooms so that it sounds more dry and can do this drum and bass beat. If I switch to the big snare, it's cool too, but it's a different flavor. This fits much better in my opinion, and that's why I switched snares. Let's go over the processing. This is how the drum sound without processing. Very good, but there's going to be some things we want to handle. For our kick, we want ultimate consistency in the low end and top end so that it's always punching through. We're going to go from this to this. That's going to be with the help of compression. Three decibels of 50-50 parallel compression. The compression is at 50% on the kick because the uncompressed signal has good low end that we want, and the compressed signal has good attack that we want. But the fully compressed signal lost a lot of low end, and the uncompressed signal doesn't have any of the attack qualities, so I got it at 50%. Experiment with parallel compression on your kick drum. Then we're going into the SSL emulation. On the SSL, we're emulating this little saturation from it being a real console board. I'll show you what it does. It's a nice boost in volume that has a bit of distortion and a little bit of low-mid boosting. And then on the EQ, we're boosting high-end at 8K and a good amount of mid-range at 2K for that nice, genty attack. We're also removing mid-range at 800. Let's listen to the before and after on the EQ. Much snappier. We're also filtering the excess top end above, let's say, 14K. R-Bass is a subharmonic generator that I'm using to add extra 50 Hz on the kick drum. With your headphones or your sub, be sure to listen for this. You certainly hear that as I boost it onto absurd levels, but that's what it's doing at a very tiny level. And the limiter is here for dynamics. So if there ever is a kick drum that is way too loud and way too snappy, the limiter will poke it down. In this case, we're not even hitting the limiter, it's just being used as a volume knob, basically. So that's the kick drum sound. On the snare, we want a very nice attack that has good amount of low end and high end so that it just pushes the entire speaker. And then we want a nice decay and almost reverb that we'll be getting from the room mic. So the direct snare mic will be going from this to this. Much more direct. Oops. So the first thing on the snare processing is the SSL again. It's being used for the EQ. Boosting 200 is where I'm going to get the snare fatness. You can hear it distort because of the saturation, which is a really cool emulation of a very real console. It's not just a clean boost. It always distorts a little bit. We're removing mid-range at 900. That's just honky. And then we're boosting a little bit of high-end and mid-range at 3K and 8K respectively, and filtering any highs above 15K again. Then a compressor of choice for the snare is this SSL bus compressor. I like it because of the 30 millisecond attack setting. Gives you a very pointy attack on your snare that lasts exactly 30 milliseconds. So let's listen for before and after the compression. You get a very distinct attack quality that I like. R-Bass is here to generate low end, just like the kick, but now it's in the 120 Hz region and not the 50 Hz sub. This is drastic. Very big low end boost. This is a clipper by Joey Sturgis Tones. And what a clipper does is, if your waveform looks like that and is very loud, a clipper is going to clip that waveform at a certain volume. And the consequence of that is distortion. So this is basically some extra distortion that lets the snare have more perceived volume. It's subtle, but it helps, and it also helps tame the dynamics of the ghost notes by bringing them up. This little corrective EQ is just getting rid of some more mid-range. Let's see what it was. This big honky region, we want to come from the rooms. And the limiter, same philosophy as the kick, to catch any loud peaks. So when the snare is very loud, it will be tamed here. As for toms, let's find a tom part. That's a big tom part, right? Why can't I hear toms? Please. Oh, that's not toms, that's hi-hats. Good job. This is a tom fill. Okay, so these toms unprocessed already sound super fat. The philosophy is to compress them individually and then together on the bus help shape them. So individually, every tom has, much like the kick, a compressor, but this time it's on full 100% compressed signal for the attack, and an SSL EQ for the saturation and distortion, and to remove mid-range at 900 and boosts 3K and 8K to get that stick attack. Much like the snare, a clipper, but this time at a very high volume. What this does is it helps the stick attack become even louder and even distorted, and boosts the low end of the tom into the stick attack. This EQ is just correcting a little ring this tom has at 95 Hertz. Sounded a bit too boomy. Every tom has a similar chain, and then on the tom bus, they're all going through this free plugin, the density compressor. They're not going into it for the compression, but for the color knob, which is very similar to the other saturation knob on the SSL. So if you're looking for a tool to saturate the low end, look no further than this free plugin and its little color knob. Let's try a before and after, see if we can tell the difference. That will be off, and that will be on. Very subtle, but nice qualities on the low end. In the same style as the snare, this compressor is here to boost the attack by giving it a slow attack compression that lets 30 milliseconds of every attack go through. So before and after. Just a nice tight attack. And then even more SSL saturation to get the toms to be the most thick they can be, but getting rid of the sub frequencies and letting the kick take care of those. So anything beneath 80 Hertz can go. This is not exactly 80 Hertz. It's a very not steep slope for a filter. So it still has some sub frequencies and you can hear them, of course. Now, everything else that's not a direct mic is here on what I call the brass bus. So this is rooms plus overheads and direct mics. This is how I am shaping them. So getting rid of sub frequencies, that's the kicks business. Shaping the mid-range too, and getting rid of annoying frequencies on cymbals. That's our priority number one. Number one was here, this 4K region, which I'm going to boost so you can see. On these cymbals, this was offender number 1. This is the first frequency I tried to tame. A boosted 9K helps the cymbals cut through where it's nice and not that mid-range. The hi-hat mic here, is there a hi-hat part? Okay. The hi-hat mic only needs to get the low end taken care of. Since it's a direct mic, just like my voice, if I make it too close, it's very bassy. If I get further, it's less bassy. Since it's very close to the hi-hat, it has unnecessary low end that I got rid of. Overhead mic. Going through compression to make the cymbals, instead of them being washy in volume, I want them to be always loud and always have a consistent volume. Volume is really the word. Instead of hearing a psh, I want to hear a psh. I want them to be longer, and that's what compression does. But I also blended it in at 60% to not get them too big. Let's get a cymbal part. You can tell how it makes the overheads nice and stable in volume. And then the EQ is here to shape the cymbals again, get rid of low frequencies beneath 300 Hertz. So this is a very drastic filter. Kick and snare. No kick and no snare. And again, shaping the 4K region, getting rid of some more, and boosting the good high end at 10K. Moving on to the rooms. There's 3 room mics, a room close mic that I like to keep very natural. It's just going through the SSL saturation to boost it a little bit. The room far, which is very important. This is basically my snare reverb. I don't use reverb on... Oh God, sorry. I don't really like using reverbs on direct mics, so listen to this. This is where my snare reverb is coming from. Basically, by overcompressing the room mic, I get the snare to become very lengthy and very, well, roomy, for a lack of a better word. So absolutely crushing the snare on the room mics and EQing some annoying mid-range out of the snare, actually. The little woo. This mono mic is here for an effect. It's only hitting snare and toms, I believe. As you can hear, it sounds crazy, very, very explosive too. So I'm enhancing those qualities with, you guessed it, saturation and a crazy EQ. Yeah, so that's a maximum boost at 10K and an almost maximum boost at 100 Hertz. That's crazy. But if you blend it in with the rest of the kit, it just makes the snare cut through in an amazing way. So that's what I use the mono mic for. That's basically the drum sound. On the drum bus, it's going to go through the same saturation and a little boost in the high end. And then our drum compressor is going to make sure that the kick and the snare don't poke through too loud. Oops, bad part. Today, it's basically just hitting the snare. And that is the drum sound. Very cool. As for the hi-hat loop, this is a funny one. I took a hi-hat from Get Good Drums Invasion. This little tiny thing. And I just I duplicated the whole drum sound, deleted anything that wasn't a cymbal mic, and just deleted all the drums except for this hi-hat. And then I programmed the hi-hat loop. If you mix this, which is very cool. So that's exactly the cymbal processing that's over there, but duplicated, and there's only a hi-hat. And then there's a very important tool, which is a Reaper plugin called Transient Driven Auto Pen. So let's take this part by part. Auto pen is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to pen the hi-hat in different places, and you can hear that. And see that here. The other part is that it's transient driven. Being transient driven means it's going to work whenever it hears an attack. So basically, every time the hi-hat hits, it's going to be panned in a different place in the stereo spectrum. And that's what this plugin does, which is super awesome. Very cool. That's the only different thing. And of course, removing unnecessary low end. And again, the 4K region was pretty harsh. So that's how I got the hi-hat loop. This bass tone has been my usual bass tone for these covers. It's the STL Tonality Will Putney plugin on the Laugh Tracks preset from the Knocked Loose album with the same name. Basically, some extra treble might have been added. And then what I do is run it through this bass compressor by Joel Wanasek and Joey Sturgis Tones that lets me dial in the volume of the high end and the low end independently. This is how I rebalance the tone. You can tell it also does pretty big EQ actually. And then, of course, I gave it a lot more high end than low end. This EQ is here to shape the tone a little bit, get rid of sub-frequencies that belong to the kick beneath 55 Hz, and boost mid-range at 350 so that it wells really nicely with the guitars. Listen to this. As I cut and boost this frequency, the relationship with the guitars completely changes. So experiment with the mid-range on your bass. Don't always scoop it to get the djenty tone. And then there was this annoying peak at 4K. Goodbye, get out of my life. On the special breakdown part, it's the exact same tone, but I got to the pedal section and I turned on the distortion pedal all the way. So gain is at 10 and volume is at 10. And that's the difference between the other tone and this tone, is that the gain is at 10 on the distortion pedal. Basically, that's it. Let's go over the guitar sound. Guitar sound was very simple. On the same plugin as the bass, the Will Putney tonality, I chose Amp 1, so the 5150 emulation, and then I chose Cabinet 3. I thought Cabinet 3 had the correct amount of mid-range for the song and tone. And then the EQ proves me wrong. I actually thought it had way too much mid-range. Because in this song, the guitars are meant to be a harmonic instrument, not really a percussive djenty one. it's basically doing big chords. And this mid-range was very distracting on those big chords. If I turn this EQ off, you'll be shocked. We're talking about this, by the way. That's cool in some scenarios, but here it was too much. The rest is just filters, so anything beneath 75 Hz is the bass and kicks business, and above 6K basically was the synths business. The guitar is not very important on this song. Then there's the mono guitar in the breakdown. The mono guitar, I had the exact same tone, but then I switched to the amplifier 2, which is the Bogner emulation, and then I used the bass cab. The bass cab together with the bass tone that has its own bass cab melded in a super crazy way right in the center of the mix. And then I cut annoying mid-range again. And then I used Joey Sturgistone's this side widener to give it just 10% width so that it's not exactly dead on the center. It's a super subtle thing. The lead sound, let's listen to it. It's super simple. It's the same tone on the amp, but I reduced the gain way down, the pre-gain and post-gain. Switched the cabinet to cabinet 4 for a different flavor. Way more mid-range, which is cool for the lead sound. And on the EQ, I turned the filters all the way up. So no low end beneath 330 and no high end above, I think that says 5K. Let's go with 5K. I'm reinforcing that with my EQ and getting rid of 3.2 kHz here. Very sharp and unnecessary. And giving it some widening. This is another free plugin by Infected Mushroom. This is wider and it does this. It can make your mono signals stereo in a cool way. Then the wet lead here on the build-ups. And verses 2 is Toneforge Jason Richardson on the lead amp with very much reduced gain. Going into my favorite reverb, Little Plate, on about 70% mix and 8 seconds of reverb. That will get you here. This EQ is here to filter low end up to 200 and high end down to 6K. The delay is here to add stereo bounce. Which is very cool. And this Reaper plugin is here to get it wider. So it's another way to get it wider. We've seen Side Widener by Joey Sturgis Tones. We've seen Wider by Infected Mushroom. And now here's the Reaper version of it, which is the stereo width plugin. I'm not using it so much to boost the side image as I am using it to cut the center image, which has the same effect. By cutting the center image, you get the same effect as boosting the side image. The solo was by my good dude Robin Lenoutre, so it's all his tone. I'm sorry I cannot explain this solo tone. But knowing him, I think this is Toneforge Misha Mansour. I won't bet on that, but I think that's what it is. As for the synths, you've seen me do this in other tutorials, and I will be explaining the same synths in other subsequent tutorials. But basically, all the synths need is some heavy EQ to make them fit. So this soft synth that's doing the note, it's a bit too fizzy on the high end, so we're taking care of it with an EQ. I wanted to see if this EQ was automated, but no, we're heavily filtering low end and heavily filtering top end. This bass synth it's the artificially enhanced patch from Expand. And we're just taking care of the sub frequencies that the bass and kick should be taking care of, because we only want this to act in the lows, in the conservative lows, not the sub lows. Christ. That's two different beasts. So this is our rhythm synth. The patch is called Trans, very aptly named. We're getting rid of low end that it doesn't need and EQing some lame harmonics, such as this one. So you can hear it going, and I just want the main note. The last synth is the most important. It is our chord synth from the chorus. Same philosophy, heavy EQ to get rid of all the bad frequencies that are too much, because we're dealing with bass and guitars already. So low end, that's unnecessary. Gone. Mid-range, that belongs to the guitars. Spiky high end, that belongs to the cymbals. And the very, very, very fizzy top end above 16K, that's just unnecessary and annoying on headphones. Can you hear that? Because that's barely audible, but it is a difference. Well, and that is the very big tutorial for 4D. This is such a cool song, and it has really cool elements such as the hi-hat loop and many other synth work. So I will be futurely referring the NORTHLANE drum tones to this tutorial, since I have switched the snare on Modern and Massive, which is the biggest difference. And yeah, guys, thank you for watching this mix tutorial. I'll be catching up on the following one soon, and I'll see you later. Peace.